Not to get political or anything, but Stalin was kind of an idiot. When you think of Stalin, there are three things that may come to mind: mass oppression, purging anyone who may be a threat, and killing people just for fun. Yusuf Bessarionis was born on the 18th of December in 1878 to a Georgian family in the city of Gori. Growing up, he wasn't very wealthy, and his father didn't like him. He was once beaten so badly by his father that he was in a coma for 2 weeks. He lived, unfortunately. He went to school, contracted smallpox, was run over by a cart, and later developed some edgy political beliefs when he was older. One day he met Vladimir Lenin and would go on to join him and his buddies. He would also take a liking towards the use of violence to raise money for the party. He got arrested a few times and was eventually exiled to Siberia. The Russian Empire would go on to collapse during World War I, and the Bolsheviks would gain power. During the revolution and the subsequent civil war, Stalin and his friends would get up to all sorts of shenanigans. His power within the party increased over time as he handed out jobs to his friends, and, after Lenin died, he got rid of everyone who he didn't like. Stalin also created a cult of personality surrounding himself that some people are still stupid enough to believe to this day. From a poor little Georgian boy to the leader of the Soviet Union, Stalin's rise to power is certainly impressive and wouldn't have been possible without some smart political manipulation. But you see, he may have been a good politician. Unfortunately, that does not mean he was a good leader, or even a good person. When it came to things such as military affairs, he was downright stupid. An early indication of his struggling intellect would be shown during the Polish-Soviet War. Tensions with Poland had been on the rise for quite some time, eventually leading to a Polish offensive into Belarus and Ukraine. Trotsky would go on to send Mikhail Tukhachevsky and Joseph Stalin to deal with the problem. Stalin would be given command of various units, including the elite 1st Cavalry Army. Their job would be to recapture Kyiv along with the rest of Ukraine, which they succeeded. However, the war was far from over and Tukhachevsky needed help. Of course, Stalin didn't help him, which may or may not have contributed to a crippling defeat during the Battle of Warsaw. Later, he would realize that sitting on his ass and doing nothing was kinda stupid, so he allowed the 1st Cavalry Army to invade Poland basically without any support. It was promptly destroyed. Both Lenin and Trotsky would go on to blame Stalin for the defeat. Way to go, Stalin. You genius. While millions may have been dying due to hunger and political repression, the Red Army was experiencing a large amount of growth and modernization. This was largely thanks to Mikhail Tukhachevsky, who helped reorganize and rearm the Red Army, as well as establishing several new military schools. Stalin took note of Tukhachevsky's accomplishments and proceeded to award him for his efforts. "Comrade Stalin, I've successfully modernized the Red Army. Congratulations, Comrade Tukhachevsky. I have gift for you. Comrade Voroshilov, show Comrade Tukhachevsky his gift."
You are accused of treason and anti-Soviet behavior. The court finds you guilty and sentences you to be shot.
The irony of all of this is that the Soviets would go on to use his ideas in the very near future. Anyways, one of Stalin's biggest fears was that one day a talented and well-respected general would rise up and overthrow him in a coup, hence why Tukhachevsky is sometimes referred to as Red Napoleon. So, bang, 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 36,671 officers were purged. Not all were killed though. Officers such as Konstantin Radosovsky were simply just tortured and imprisoned, which, to be honest, is probably worse than death. Anyways, the result of this was that the Red Army was in dire need of leadership and was suffering from low morale. It also halted modernization efforts because the officers that remained, such as Kliment Voroshilov, were idiots and the rest were too scared to do anything. But who gives a shit? Stalin's position of power was secured, and as long as a major war didn't happen to break out anytime soon, things would be a-okay. Right? Imagine this. You're the leader of a country. There's this other country that is invading other countries. There's also a few countries that want to work together with your country to stop the aggressive country from invading other countries. What do? A. Work together to stop the aggressor. B. Do nothing. C. Sign a non-aggression pact with a potential enemy. If you chose C, then congratulations, comrade. You get a sack of potatoes and bottle of vodka. Jokes aside, this was pretty stupid.
But Stalin, he was just choosing the most reasonable option in this situation. Any smart human being would have done the same.
First of all, shut the fuck up. Second, let's analyze the situation. After World War I, the Germans were all high on copium because they were a bunch of sore fucking losers. Instead of admitting that they had just simply lost, many would go on to find a convenient scapegoat to put the blame on. Eventually, this inbred guy with a superiority complex gets elected and put into power. Prior to that, he wrote a book talking about how much he hates communism, as well as some other things. and talks about how he wants to create living space in the East. He is also proven to be untrustworthy and has violated several treaties in the past. Do you really think a fucking piece of paper is going to protect you from this man? Do you? And it's not like Stalin had no options here. Prior to signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Lord something British name tried to form an anti-German alliance with the Soviets. Think about it. With three of the most powerful nations in Europe working together to kick Hitler's ass, you would think that all of this could have ended so much quicker instead of lasting 6 years. Oh, but no. No. He didn't want to work with them, because that meant he wouldn't be able to pursue his own ambitions elsewhere. And by elsewhere, I mean outside of his own borders. Even if Stalin had done absolutely nothing, the Germans would have had a much harder time during the start of the war due to a prolonged campaign in Poland and an even greater shortage of men and material. He basically gave Germany the chance to conquer Poland, turn their focus west, conquer some more territory, fuck over France, kick Britain off continental Europe, and convince other countries to join them. Stalin wasn't that stupid despite what I'm making it sound to be. Stalin knew that sometime in the future, he would have to fight the Germans. He just didn't know when. That's why he put so much faith in this treaty, hoping it would prevent the inevitable just for a little bit longer. The problem is that the only way to get a dictator like Hitler to cooperate is through force, something that we'll eventually see was kind of lacking. Congratulations, Stalin. You've successfully divided up Europe into spheres of influence. Now it's time to take action. Lithuania, invaded. Latvia, invaded. Estonia, invaded. Romania, invaded. Finland, well, that one's gonna be a little tricky. Stalin wanted a chunk of Finnish territory along the border to act as a buffer between them and Leningrad. In exchange, he'd give Finland a slice of Karelia. However, the Finns believed that the deal wasn't worth it. Vyacheslav Molotov would try to convince the Finns to peacefully submit to their demands. Unfortunately for him, they didn't. So, if diplomacy doesn't work, then there's always violence, you know? Something that I'm sure Stalin was quite fond of. Timoshenko devised a plan to concentrate Red Army units along a small front line in the south, hoping to capture Finland's population centers, or to at least scare them into giving up. Stalin thought this plan was lame. Instead, he opted for Voroshilov's plan. It fails, miserably. They then change plans and finally convince the Finns to give them what they want. Despite this being a victory, the Soviets were still humiliated. Stalin, of course, didn't take responsibility for this fuck-up and just found a convenient scapegoat. In Voroshilov's defense, he actually stood up for himself and lived. The Winter War occurred around a time that Stalin had kind of realized that perhaps getting rid of all of his officers was kind of a bad thing. So he, along with literally everyone, concluded that the Red Army was incapable of effectively waging a war, at least for the time being. Prior to this, Stalin had already begun stepping back a little on his policies of killing everyone. Many officers, such as Rokossovsky, were released from captivity and given their old jobs back. Competent commanders, such as Zhukov, were given control of strategically important districts, such as Kyiv. Military high command was even willing to listen to some criticism, such as when various officers started complaining about the power held by the political commissars. However, the damage had already been done, and it would be a while till the Soviets would recover. Comrade Stalin, our intelligence reports suggest large movements of German soldiers along the border. Nuh-uh. Comrade Stalin, a German deserter says the Axis will invade in a few hours. Nuh-uh. Stalin, the Germans are fucking invading us. Nuh-uh. Comrade Stalin, the German ambassador is literally telling us that we're being fucking invaded. German soldiers participating in Operation Barbarossa were greeted by quite the surprise during the morning of the invasion. Soviet soldiers stationed along the border were so unprepared for an attack that they weren't even fully dressed. They were quite literally caught with their pants down. To put things lightly, this was a shit show. Don't believe me? Here, let me show you a few things. Stalin limited the response of the Red Army in fear of provoking the Germans, even though they were already at war. On the first day alone, 1,800 Soviet aircraft were destroyed. German reconnaissance units caused confusion behind Soviet lines, leading many soldiers to give up believing they had been surrounded. Things were so bad that Nikita Khrushchev even witnessed many officers kill themselves due to the situation. Logistics were so bad that the Red Army had to abandon a lot of their vehicles due to the lack of fuel. Stalin insisted, against the suggestions of his generals, to dig in. opting for a constant stream of counterattacks. These failed for obvious reasons. 320,000 Red Army soldiers were captured after being encircled around Minsk. This actually made Zhukov cry. 65 ships along with 14,000 sailors and soldiers were lost after the waters around the port of Tallinn had been mined by a few German submarines. Around 700,000 Red Army soldiers were encircled in Uman and in Kyiv. All this could have been avoided if Stalin had given the order to retreat just a little bit earlier. Way to go, Stalin. There was never an effective attempt to evacuate Leningrad, which I'm sure will not lead to terrible casualties in the future. The Germans successfully encircled around 600,000 Red Army soldiers around Vyazma and Bryansk, leaving Moscow vulnerable to attacks. During many breakout attempts around Vyazma, Soviet soldiers would often attack the enemy while drunk because the officers had handed out what was left of the vodka. There were also some cases during night attacks that the Soviets would reach German lines, the Germans would retreat, the Soviets would continue pushing forward, and would confuse the Germans for their own guys. Who's to blame for all of this? Who the fuck do you think? All of this was caused either directly or indirectly by Stalin. Whether it was the purges, the poor decisions, or a complete denial of reality is what led to all of this. To give Stalin some credit though, his decision to move Soviet factories to the east was unironically the smartest thing he has ever done. He also gave Zhukov the task of defending Moscow. Now, you may believe that this was a sign that Stalin had learned his lesson. Either that, or he just wanted a scapegoat in case he failed. Anyways, the Soviets won the Battle of Moscow, and everyone lived happily ever after. You'd think he'd stop micromanaging the war effort by now, but all this did was increase his ego. After consulting with Khrushchev and Timoshenko, Stalin decided to launch an offensive towards the city of Kharkiv in hopes of breaking through and liberating Ukraine. Zhukov thought this idea was stupid, but Stalin didn't give a shit. The entire force of 250,000 was promptly destroyed. Way to go, Stalin. After their victory, the Germans launched an offensive towards the Caucasus and the Volga River, aiming to secure the oil fields and cut off the Soviet supply lines. Stalin finally tells political commissars that they're cringe, the Germans reach Stalingrad, the civilians aren't properly evacuated, you know what happens next. As the battle goes on, the Soviets are trying to figure out a way to end it. Rokossovsky and Zhukov devise a plan to encircle the German 6th and the Romanian 4th and 5th armies in the city. During a meeting with Stalin, they mentioned this plan, and to their surprise, Stalin actually shuts the fuck up and listens. The Axis are surrounded and defeated. Stalin finally learns to trust his generals, and the Soviets win the war. The end. No, he didn't learn his lesson. Stalin then proceeds to order a series of offensives across the front line. They fail, as you can expect. Though by now I think he has actually learned his lesson, so there's that. Kursk happens, the Soviets win. Operation Bagration happens, it's an even bigger win. Rokossovsky of the 2nd Belarusian Front, Zhukov of the 1st Belarusian Front, Ivan Konev of the 1st Ukrainian Front, all advanced through Poland, and then later into Germany, reaching the gates of Berlin. Stalin insisted that they all compete against each other to see who gets to the German capital first. When you take into consideration that Zhukov and Konev didn't really get along all that well, you get the idea that perhaps more people ended up dying than what was necessary. But hey, who gives a shit? The Soviets took Berlin along with most of Eastern Europe. Churchill didn't really like this and tried to negotiate with Stalin. Roosevelt thought that he could charm Uncle Joe over into listening to him. Yeah, he didn't. World War II was probably the best opportunity for the Soviets to spread their influence across all of Eastern Europe. So who knows, maybe everything went according to plan after all. Anyways, Stalin continued to do Stalin things, redraw some borders, install a few puppets, suppress anti-Soviet movements, lock up the traitors, defame Zhukov, and oppress minorities. Stalin never really had a record for treating others with respect. However, it wasn't necessarily because he was just racist, but because he viewed cultural and ethnic diversity as being a threat to the unity of the working class. Or to his own power, but whatever. One group that he distrusted were the Jews. Molotov's wife was accused of being a Zionist spy, while many others were either deported, imprisoned, or executed. Many of those who were purged just so happens to be doctors. Oh boy, I sure do hope that no one will be needing any immediate medical attention anytime soon.
Should we investigate?
Should you shut the fuck up before you get us both killed?
The funny thing is that Stalin probably could have been saved by his guards if they weren't so scared to check in on him. Oh yeah, and all the surviving doctors were too terrified to treat him. So, in a way, his reign of terror kind of bit him in the ass at the end. Millions were imprisoned, millions were killed, millions were starved, millions were deported, millions were subjugated, and millions more were forced to live in fear for decades. You'd expect that most people would come to the conclusion that Stalin wasn't a very good guy. But here's the thing though, is that no matter how many people suffered because of him, you still have a bunch of dumbasses who unironically defend this guy. He saved the Soviet Union, he saved Europe, he defeated the Nazis, and if it weren't for him and the T-34, we'd all be speaking German. No, not really. He didn't save anyone. You know who did save the Soviet Union? These people. You know who defeated the Nazis? These people. You know why we aren't speaking German? Because there was no way on earth that the Axis could have won the war. Also, the Sherman was the best tank of the war. Fight me. Stalin's leadership in many ways hindered the USSR's development and caused them to suffer horrendous losses during the war, which still affects many post-Soviet countries to this day. Stalin doesn't deserve to be remembered as a hero. To remember him as a monster probably wouldn't even make him that mad. Better yet, I think it's best to remember Stalin for what he truly was. That of an idiot. Quick channel update, YouTube hasn't been very nice to me. I want to upload stuff like this on a second channel, however I don't have the time to do so. I want to thank a friend of mine who helped me with some of the research, as well as give a shout out to another. He makes videos about naval and aviation history, as well as some other things. Anyways, hope all is well, and take care. Goodbye.